This is the first pitching machine ever used in Japan. This was brought in 1955.
1955. I guess this is where...
Bob Whiting, an American expatriate who has written the definitive book on Japanese baseball, arranged to have an expo uniform introduced into a niche reserved for famous gaijin.
The Japanese are really a cautious people. You see that in all facets of life. You see it in the business world here. It takes a really long time to arrive at a decision, with a lot of meetings and getting everyone to agree. And that spills over into baseball. One of the reasons, in my opinion, why the Japanese like baseball so much is there's no time limit.
Right.
No clock.
Yeah, that's right.
It takes 6 hours to play 9 innings, so be it, right?
So be it, that's right.
Marshall here. It's good to see you. Thank you for clicking on this video. And this is me from the editing suite here on the other end of not only as you can no doubt see by the timeline of the videos being released shortly, on the other end of a lengthy spell of burnout, and on the other end of about a week-long battle with COVID-19. But I have, as you can no doubt see by the title, a banger of a video for you today. I really, really hope you enjoyed it. Mr. Whiting was a joy to talk to, and this video is going to be released in 2 parts. This will be part 1, and stay tuned next week for part 2. The other thing I want you to stay tuned for is, of course, as promised on Instagram, the life and times of Fumio Fujimura as the latest episode in global baseball's finest. And last bit of housekeeping here before we get started. Don't be alarmed if too many of the videos disappear. They are going to be remade and redone. These will be the first few episodes of global baseball's finest from last year. They are going to be re-recorded and re-edited for your viewing pleasure. So stay tuned for that. It'll be new and exciting information that were not in the first episodes here. So hopefully you really enjoy those, and I'll see you for those as the season wraps up here. My, it's been quite a busy one. I'm looking forward to talking with you all about it here shortly. But for now, part 2 of this interview will be coming next week. Enjoy part 1 of GBN's interview with Robert Whiting. Well, it has been a long time away. Glad that you joined us for this one. And the man to my left is our special guest on today's show, author of several acclaimed books on Japanese culture, and specifically for our purposes today, Japanese baseball. These include, but are not limited to, The Chrysanthemum and the Bat, You Gotta Have Wa, Tokyo Underworld, an absolutely thrilling account of the Yakuza in its prime, and one of the most riveting autobiographies I have ever read, personally, Tokyo Junkie, 60 Years of Bright Lights and Back Alleys and Baseball. Mr. Robert Whiting, it is a privilege to speak to you, sir.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, let's get right into it, shall we? So in Tokyo Junkie here, you have outlined a very vivid account of what it was like to be living in Tokyo on an Air Force base during the city's extensive construction and renovation process in the lead up to the 1964 Olympics. So during those first few months there, I mean, what was that like? Was it enchanted? Maybe a little weird? I mean, what was strange to you in this brand new place? And how did you spend your time outside of your assigned duties with the Air Force?
Well, every chance I got on a train, went into Tokyo. It was a 25-minute ride on the Keio line into Shinjuku, and another 20-minute ride to the Ginza, heart of the Ginza, on the subway. And what got me was, I mean, coming from a quiet small town of about 30,000 people, Eureka, California, this fishing and logging village, I guess you could call it, was there was just so much going on. You couldn't process it all. You turn, the streets were crowded with cars and people. There were more bars and restaurants per square kilometer than any other city in the world. The trains were so packed at rush hour. The train stations employed platform pushers to push the commuters on, squeeze them in, as the doors closed. And there was just something about the energy of the place that sucked you in. You just wanted to be part of it, and experience more. There was just so much activity and vitality.
Absolutely.
And they were rebuilding the city after the war. The war had ended in 1945, and most of Tokyo had been destroyed, and people were living in jerry-rig houses and that sort of thing. And they sort of did a catch-as-catch-can recovery. But for the Olympics, they started they got the bid to the Olympics. They won it in early 1959. And at the time, Tokyo only had they had no basic infrastructure. There was no integrated road system. There was only one major hotel, international hotel, the Imperial, which was sort of becoming seedy as the years when that was built in 1925. No building was taller than 10 stories. The infant mortality rate was really high. You weren't supposed to drink the tap water.
Yeah.
And people wondered, how in the hell are they ever going to get ready? How they ever got the bid in the first place, and how they were ever going to get ready for the 1964 Olympic Games.
Yeah.
In the span of 5 years, they put up 10,000 new buildings, 8 overhead expressways, 2 new subway lines. 10,000 new buildings, did I say that?
Yeah.
And they turned the place into such this high-tech megalopolis, including all the Olympic venues, that the James Bond people came to Tokyo in 1956 and filmed You Only Live Twice. They put up 5 5-star luxury hotels, and one of them was the Hotel New Otani, which at 17 stories was the tallest building in Asia at the time. And that was a primary location of You Only Live Twice. That was the headquarters of Sato Chemicals. I was out of the military at that time, and the movie was being filmed, and I was a student at Sophia University, this Jesuit school in Tokyo, sister school of Georgetown and Loyola. And we would go down and watch. It was just a short walk down to the Otani, and we would watch the filming there. But it was just so dynamic that I'd never seen anything like it. I later lived in New York, and even New York, it just couldn't match Tokyo.
Oh, absolutely not.
So I just got sucked in. I was addicted to the city, hence the title of Tokyo Junkie.
An apt title, to be sure. Do you think it still kind of holds that same energy today from what you've seen? I know you split your time there.
It's not as dynamic as it used to be, because there's no need to rebuild, but there's a constant building going on. I mean, they tear buildings down that shouldn't even be. I mean, one of the things, I forgot to say this about being in Tokyo during the pre-Olympic period, you could stand on the street in Ginza or Shinjuku. Now, one side of the street, they'd be tearing a building down, and on the other side, they'd be putting it up. It was just amazing how they did this. And they were, at the end, they were working 24-hour shifts. They had construction lights on all night, 7 days a week. So if you were staying in the city, you had to have black curtains to block out these big construction lights, and you needed earplugs to block out the sound of the pile drivers, that were tearing up the streets and putting in the subways. Now it's more refined, but there's still a lot more. It's probably the most modern city in the world. They put up something like I don't know, several hundred new buildings in the 4 years between the time Tokyo got the bid for the 2020 Olympics and the time that the games were actually held.
It's miraculous.
It's more, I think that people are more sophisticated, a little more sedate now than they were then. But I think right now it's the #1 city in the world by number of metrics. It's got the highest GDP. It's got the highest literacy rate, the longest life expectancy. There are more Michelin-starred restaurants than any other city in the world. There are twice as many 3-star Michelin restaurants
I didn't know that.
as Paris. It's the safest city in the world. Crime is really non-existent when compared to New York City or Washington, D.C. It's got the largest, most extensive, most efficient subway and train transportation system of any city in the world.
Oh, without equal.
Always run on time. And if they're like 20 seconds late, there's an immediate apology over the loudspeaker. It's the most organized city in the world. It's almost impossible to get lost. It's actually possible to get lost because it's happened to me. But it's probably one of the most organized city in the world.
Yeah, it seems that way. Now you were talking about obviously you left the Air Force. You became enrolled at Sophia University. Right. And one of the most intriguing accounts of your time in university that stuck out to me was you met one of the most powerful men in the history of Japanese media there. Right. Tell me about your friendship and I guess professional relationship with Suneo Watanabe, kind of how that came about and how that affected your career.
Well, my major was political science specializing in Japanese politics at Sophia University. That's what I graduated with a degree in. And I took a seminar on the Japanese Constitution and another one on politics, and the same professor, a man named Kan Ori, who had a PhD from the University of Indiana, taught it, really interesting guy. And he just announced to the class that I have a friend, a reporter named Suneo Watanabe, who I'd never heard of. For the Yomiuri Shimbun, which was the largest newspaper in the world, and he said he wants an English teacher. So I volunteered. And so I went to his house, and he was like the ace political reporter in Tokyo at the time. And he supported the Conservative Party, the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, but he really disliked the prime minister at the time, who was Eisaku Sato, who was the president of the Liberal Democratic Party. He thought he was really corrupt, and in fact, there were so many scandals during the Sato regime that they nicknamed it the Black Mist regime. And he used to write columns criticizing Sato weekly, and it was so bad that Prime Minister Sato sent his wife to visit Watanabe's wife with an envelope full of cash and saying, "Could you please get your husband to stop writing so many critical articles? We're all conservative, supporters here." And of course, she said no. His wife was an actress, a really cheery, nice person, and so it turned out that the Yomiuri newspaper organization wanted to buy some land from the government, or get a license to buy the land from the government, or both. I can't remember the details. But the Sato government said, "Oh, sure, we'll cooperate with you, but you got to get rid of Watanabe." So they sent him to take over the Washington, D.C. bureau. But it was a year in advance, and so he needed to brush up his English. And so I went there 3 times a week for a year and talked to him. And he actually taught me. I helped him with his English, but he told me about the corruption that was going on in the LDP, and how Sato had bought, the position of prime minister, bribed his way into the post of president of the LDP. And so it was a really nice relationship. And I introduced him to some friends that I had in Washington, D.C., a guy in the military who'd gotten out and went to work for their government, and his wife, the Japanese wife. And so they became close friends. And so when Chrysanthemum and the Bat came out, Watanabe was back in Tokyo. And I went to see him and gave him a copy of the book, and he wrote a really nice piece in the Yomiuri Shimbun about it, it helped it become a bestseller. The Japanese version, that is. So, we had a good relationship until the Tokyo.
Naturally, yeah.
If I'm skipping ahead, I might as well tell the story.
Please do.
The Tokyo Giants, the Yomiuri Giants, they were the baseball team that was owned by the Yomiuri Shimbun, were playing in Korakuen Stadium, and they built this new dome stadium modeled after the old Minneapolis Metrodome, where the Twins played. And they announced that there was a capacity for 56,000 fans in that stadium. And when the Giants moved in 1987, they announced the Giants always played to a capacity crowd. So on TV, they would always, show the scoreboard, towards the 7th inning, the scoreboard would flash 56,000 people, a full house. And they started, claiming some sort of world record. And I counted the seats. I was writing a column for the Weekly Asahi, a weekly magazine that belonged to the Yomiuri Shimbun. And they asked me to count the seats and write a column about it. So I counted the seats, and there were 42,761 seats, and there's standing room for maybe 3,500. There was actually a sign deep in the bowels of the Tokyo Dome put up by the fire department that said capacity 46,134. So I published it, and he was very unhappy about that. What really made him unhappy was the fact that I published it with a publication that belonged to the Asahi Shimbun, which was the arch rival.
Yeah.
So that sort of ended that relationship. So.
Certainly a perfect storm of journalism integrity falling into question. But it seemed like you were doing your job at that point. I mean, you obviously, felt like it was the right thing to do. And it seemed like a shame to lose that friendship, but
yeah, you'd think that, they're the largest newspaper in the world. They're dedicated to truth and justice and objectivity. And there was something in Japan called the Kisha Club system. Every organization, government, and any major private institution has its own private club, which grants access to reporters from newspapers and TV. And that's all that can get in. Magazine writers can't get in, freelancers. And in return for access, you more or less have to toe the party line. And so the writers who belonged to the Yomiuri Giants Kisha Club were fed this report every night after the game that there were 56,000 people attended that night. And, most people knew that that was a lie. Most of the reporters, but they didn't want to lose their access. So
naturally. One of the things that I was most curious about was, so you graduated from Sophia, and started researching the connections between crime and politics in Japan. And so how did it exactly shake out that the Yakuza gave a young writer from Eureka, California, a title in their organization?
Well, I graduated from Sophia and I got a job in the editorial department of Encyclopedia Britannica in Shinjuku. And I rented an apartment in Higashinokano, which was a couple of stops away on the Chuo line. And I would, patronize various establishments in Kabukicho after each working day, and then come home at the end of the evening, and I would go in for a nightcap at this bar across the street from the building where I lived, called the Bokido. And it turned out there were Yakuza. It was owned by the Yakuza warrior. The owners were paying protection to the Yakuza. Anyway, it was quite common at that time. This Yakuza group was the Sumiyoshi gang that was running Tokyo at the time. And it turned out that, at that time, there were 180,000 members of organized crime, belonging to organized crime organizations in Japan. And, now it's down to like 10 or 20,000, but it was quite common then. Because the gangs had helped the government fight communists. They put down some of these demonstrations that opposed the security treaty with the US, keeping American bases in Japan. And so, they were more of a, more accepted in the public at that time. If you wanted to, if you needed to borrow some money, you could go into the local gang office, they'd sit down and serve you tea and you could talk to the boss. And, or if somebody owed you money and they weren't going to pay you back, it was very difficult to sue people in Japan at that time. There were very few lawyers and very few courtrooms. The Japanese authorities didn't want Japan to turn into the United States where people were suing each other at the drop of a hat all the time. So, they thought it was more conducive of social harmony, which is really the important thing in Japan.
Naturally.
So if you had those kinds of problems, you could go to the local organization, the Yakuza organization, and, they would help you out with them. Of course, they ran all the bars and nightclubs in the area, and the pachinko parlors and the gambling dens and the brothels and construction sites. They provided workers and security and blah, 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 all the things that, people in that line of business do.
No, certainly, yeah.
And one of the things they did was at this club, at the Bokido snack bar, was run a betting operation on baseball. And I would go in at the end of the night and make bets that, on the day before on that night's games, and there were 6 games, 3 in the Central League and 3 in the Pacific League, and they had a pool there, and you'd put down $1,000 yen, excuse me, at that time, which was the equivalent of $4 or $5, and make a bet. And I made a bet one time that I, got out over my skis and I owed about $300.
Oh,
I didn't have it on me, so the guy came to my apartment late at night, and he wanted the money. So I said, I have to get it the next day. And he says, okay, I'll see you at this such and such a time across the street. So I got the money and I went and paid him. And he says, sit down. And he says, you're American, right? And I said, yeah. And he says, well, listen, he was an enforcer he was like young 24, 25-year-old guy, built like a fire plug. I mean, really tough.
Yeah, dangerous.
Yeah. And he says, listen, you're American and I'm Okinawan. And he says, Japanese don't like Okinawans and they don't like Americans either very much. So let's be friends.
Oh, man.
And, it turned out we were both fans of the Hanshin Tigers of Osaka. That was another thing. And so he just started taking me around to different places. And They, they'd open up a pachinko parlor, they'd have a reception there, or, there'd be some new bar they opened up, and they had places in Shinjuku. The Sumiyoshi gang was very powerful, they had big construction contracts courtesy of the government. And they found out that I had written my thesis on the Liberal Democratic Party, which was ruling Japan, and that I had met Yasuhiro Nakasone, who went on to become prime minister of Japan during the 80s for several years. And they thought that was really impressive that I had met Nakasone and that I had done this thesis on the Liberal Democratic Party. Oh, we're big fans of the LDP. We support them. We get out the vote at election time. And we make people donate to the party, and in return, they give us construction contracts. And he introduced me to his boss, and his boss thought that it was just so cool that I'd met Nakasone. He says, he's a hero of ours. Nakasone was this ultra-right politician, and they, were peppering me with questions. And, why doesn't the United States just bomb Haiphong? Just blow up North Vietnam. That'll take care of the war. And so I developed this relationship with them, and they were opening up a new nightclub in Shinjuku, importing hostesses from Manila, and nobody could speak English, and the girls didn't speak any Japanese. They all spoke English, but nothing else. So they wanted me to manage this club. I mean, just to be there and, to interpret and make sure everything went smoothly. Because I could speak Japanese fairly well by then.
Naturally.
And nobody in the gang could speak English. And I was thinking about doing it. I was making good money at this job. And I was thinking about just doing it to see what it was like. And then I started to get mad one night at around midnight at that time. And we were out somewhere in some other city, in some other town on the Chuo line. And around midnight at that time, you couldn't catch a cab. You had to pay 4 or 5 times the meter rate because there was a scarcity of cabs. And so this one cab, wouldn't stop. They drive by as you're standing there frantically waving your hands. Unless you hold up 3 or 4 fingers, they won't stop. So this taxi came by about 4 or 5 miles an hour and didn't stop. So he got mad and kicked the side of the cab in the back, put a dent in the area where the gas tank is.
Lord.
The driver got out, slammed on the brakes and got out and raised his fist. And this guy just attacked him. It was on top of him, fists flying, elbows to the mouth, blood spurting. And it was disgusting. And I pulled the guy off. I just said, come on, you're going to get us arrested. Let's get out of here. And so we went back. And later, we were sitting in a back booth at the Bokido. And he pulls out a knife and he slashes his cheek. And he says, I'm ningen kuzuda. What do I ningen kuzuda? I'm human trash. And he slashed his cheek. He didn't, really cut it hard, but just enough to draw some blood. And it was his way of apologizing for his behavior. But, he had a hair trigger temper. And most of those guys were like that. They couldn't imagine. And you lived the kind of life that they did. They were up until all hours of the morning because their bars and clubs didn't close until, 3 or 4. So they're taking methamphetamines to stay awake and alert. And then they go back to their apartments and they start drinking whiskey and they take sleeping pills to get to sleep. And then they wake up around 12 or 1 and they're all groggy. So they start taking speed again so they can function too. And so they all have these, because of that, they have these hair triggered tempers. So anyway, then one day his boss asked me to get him a gun from the base. He said, you must have friends in the American military. So get me a gun. And I decided that I ought to cool it in my relationship with these people. So I told the guy that, I have a lot of overtime at Encyclopedia Britannica in editorial. But that was something they could understand because every Japanese salaryman had overtime every day. And I said, I don't think I can do it. And I just let the gun thing drop. And he wound up, he got arrested and went to prison, and he came back and he had his finger cut off. That's what you have to do in Japan to act of penance. You cut off the tip of your little finger, your pinky.
Certainly.
Then he came back by my apartment one night around midnight. He said, some people are after me. I need some money. So I had, 30,000 yen lying on the table, so in full view of him. So I just picked it up and gave it. I said, "Here, this is all I had," and then that's the last I heard of him. I wound up going back to the States several months after that, but I always wondered what happened to him. My guess is that somebody killed him.
I mean, with a temper like that, I don't think that's off base at all to imagine.
Yeah.
But I hope you all at home were on the edge of your seats just as I was there. You can't see me because unfortunately my camera died. But that is honestly one of the many thrilling stories that you can find in Tokyo Junkie, I'm sure. But yeah, that's just, you were probably afraid for your life quite often on a daily basis.
No, he was a nice guy, and he was just like anybody else. And he was crazy about the Hanshin Tigers, and they had this pitcher, Yutaka Enats, who had 401 strikeouts in the season. The guy was just, another Sandy Koufax, and we talked about him all the time. We're the same age, and we just had this relation, and we were both foreigners, sort of, because Okinawan sort of outliers. And he was okay, except when he
in those moments,
right? And then you didn't want to be around it, But most of those guys were okay. Their problem was they couldn't function in normal society because of that. So they had to turn to something. Some of them were quite intelligent, but they had to turn to a life of organized crime, or become a member of the gangs, or somebody would take care of them, tell them what to do. Go out and collect this money, and beat some heads in if you can't get it, and then come back, and which they could handle. There were a lot of jobs, in in the bars and clubs and pachinko parlors and in construction, not just for doing the construction labor, but also every construction site had its own gambling den, had its own lodgings, temporary lodgings, had its own brothel, had its own security provided by the gang.
Organization.
Security from other gangs who would come and protest at the site, pretending that they were environmentalists,
Whatever works, right?
But it was quite an experience. It was,
I imagine, yeah.
Exciting.
Thank you for watching this special program on the Global Baseball Network. Please do like and share this video if you enjoyed it, and you know somebody who would enjoy it right along with you. And hit the subscribe button and the bell icon below the video screen to be notified every single time we upload a new video to get you your fix of the world's greatest game. I've been Marshall Emmert. This has been part 1 of our interview with Robert Whiting. Stay tuned for part 2 next week. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you in the next one. But for now, that's the game.